morning and welcome to The Old School, a podcast lovingly crafted to address issues related to the American education system, the characteristics, the idiosyncrasies, the problems, solutions, insofar as we know the solutions. Good morning, Herr Dr. Bourgeois.
Good morning, Herr Miller. How are you doing this fine morning?
I'm doing well. You know what I was getting into this week?
No.
Was Casablanca.
You're not going to start quoting now, are you?
I kind of quote all the time.
How many times have you actually seen the film from beginning to end?
It must be around 6 or 7 times. Okay. I think I've seen the entire film, stem to stern, as it were. That's a naval term, by the way.
Thank you for that. Stem to stern. So what's your impression of Casablanca? Why do you keep coming back to it?
I keep coming back to it. I think part of it is just the exotic locale. The idea that some of this stuff is playing out, some of this kind of ordinary skullduggery, espionage, backstabbing, what have you. All this is being played out on the backdrop of a very ancient, very enchanting, very historical city. And you also have a bunch of people in the movie that are desperately fighting their nature. And I think that kind of creates a nice little tension, and I kind of appreciate it. And it probably should probably go without saying, it's probably one of the greatest scripts ever created. The fact that it is so easy to quote, and you and I have quoted ad nauseum from this particular movie. I think that's one of the reasons why, this is a film that demands attention so many years later.
Okay, well, I'm glad. I know it's available to be watched.
And this isn't just me. You like it. Why do you like it?
Well, I could just be crass and say Ingrid Bergman, but it's not that simple.
Never is.
No, no. I think it's really, really smart.
Mm-hmm.
The little one-liners, he's just like other men, only more so.
Yes,
I mean it hits you hard because it's really direct in the verbiage, and they don't. It's tight. They don't waste a lot of effort in the narrative. They really get to it. Mm-hmm. And it builds to a climax pretty comfortably. So it's just really natural. You watch it, and it's a ritual that you tend to not watch a little bit of it and stop.
Right.
I watch it from beginning to end.
Are my eyes really brown? It's one of my favorite lines in the whole film. Are my eyes really brown? It's just that kind of quizzical look on his face, kind of innocent. So anyway, what about the idea of talking?
Talking? I think we were doing that already, Herr Miller.
Yes, but I want to take it from the social to the academic side of things. We've just been engaged in 3 minutes of harmless banter about Casablanca, but what if the conversation requires more sincerity, requires more thought? And a lot of it has to do with what is done in an academic sense. In your experience, both in German and in music, what is the role of students speaking in class?
I think in a perfect world, as a German teacher, they would just have one voice, and that was their German voice. And sometimes, I don't think I ever did this, but many German teachers give them a German name, which would be considered racist or inappropriate today, maybe, to say.
Not for Germans. Germans do not enjoy such protected status anymore.
Yeah, Kurt or Hans or some silly thing like that.
No one cares about the cultural appropriation of German culture.
That's right. But I think in general, I got to know my students very, very well, and there was a lot of banter like we're doing. And one of my goals as a high school teacher of a elective was help those students become who they are, to develop, to exaggerate their eccentricities, and be able to have a voice in the class. And I think it's unique because often I would have students for 1, 2, 3, or even 4 years. And so they would find a place in the German program and in the class. So yeah, there was a lot of casual conversation. Even taking roll, I would often give them an opportunity to say what's going on. What do you think? So I was pretty open to it, and then we get to business. So I learned a lot about my students and really enjoyed them.
Musically, I mean, I know a lot of times when you're heading up a music class, it's kind of a top-down approach. You have a particular selection of music, maybe that, and again, this may differ between a music class as opposed to, like orchestra or band or something like that. But, within the framework of a music class, of course, there are conversations to be had. How do you approach a particular type of music? How do you kind of alter it a little bit? How do you make it your own? That sort of thing. Was that elements of a typical music class, yours or others that you know of?
Well, I think you're right. A rehearsal is different.
Right.
Pretty much giving orders and they're following them,
Right.
And not asking any questions. Typically, they allow that in the hands of the director. But I did teach applied music, which was a combination of listening and performing on various instruments or singing, and really an exercise in composition and performance for people of varying levels of competence musically. But the first part of the class, I think, addresses your question, because we had listening activities, and usually I assigned a student to bring in a piece of music, anything that they wanted. The rule was that it was important to them personally for whatever reason. And so they played it, and then the other students would simply listen, and then there would be open discussion about what they felt, what it means, and maybe why that person chose it. So there's back and forth. And then often I would follow up with something, because I'm taking them through a curriculum, essentially music history, and the same process. So I'm teaching them how to articulate, talk about music. The only rule I had was you can't bring up Disney when you're describing, because often students, they know what their world is, so they'll say, well, this reminds me of a scene from this Disney movie, and I'd say, take
No
that
Fantasia.
off.
You can't bring up Fantasia.
Yeah, I'm just saying, take that off the table. How do you feel? If you have any narrative, what's your own narrative rather than Walt Disney's?
To what degree, since you've been teaching a long time, and in some of those years in a supervisory capacity beyond your particular discipline, I have thoughts on this matter myself. I'm kind of interested in what you have seen. Are there particular subjects that lend itself more to students' participation orally, verbally, expressing opinions, thoughts, ideas, suggestions, as opposed to other subjects? And does that happen?
I think your subject of history, there's certainly, it's a discussion and reading based course, so that I'm that lends itself to that kind of conversation. Anything that you're kind of on the clock, like math, and you have a state test, and you in a real tight sequence. I think the students come alive in whatever way. You can't really help that, because their personalities become part of the class. But there's also a portion of students, and I was like this, that would prefer not to say a single word except good morning, maybe, and then leave the class. And so they're not a talking head, as it were. I like that image where students are sitting in rows, and every once in a while they're acknowledged and they talk, and then they stop talking and listen. But I think that about 30, 40, maybe even 50 or 60% of a given class, they're not even talking heads. They're just sitting there, maybe secretly hoping not to be called on, and just to get through the class period without incident, without embarrassment or having to talk.
Was it John Cleese that once said that the goal of every British person is to die without embarrassing themselves?
That's perfect.
Wow. But I think here's a student like you, I zero in on. Because if a student is not keen to speak, I'm certainly not going to callously throw them to the wolves, as it were, where I will specifically and without warning ask them a question that has to deal with something or another. Now, I have on occasion, especially with students who have, modifications and things of that nature that may have other issues that they're struggling with. They want to participate, but they don't know how to participate. Sometimes what I've done in the past is I have pulled them aside at the beginning of class and prepped them. Said, listen, I'm going to talk about the subject. I'd really like to hear your thoughts about such and such, just so they can have time to think about it, have time to kind of craft something. And then in the course of the discussion, they'll either raise their hand or I may say, oh, I thought you had your hand up. So-and-so, what do you think? That sort of thing, and try to make it as easy as possible. But I remember an English teacher one time telling me that, she was angry because the kids were just not, well, they were just dead. They were quiet, and she goes, I need y'all to stop being students and start being participants in this lesson. This is, I don't need the education. You do, and you can't have it unless you can talk about it. So for me, in a classroom, I demand that my students talk. And the thing is that in a lot of cases, they are not asked to speak at all in most of their other classes. This is one of the things that bothers me a little bit about STEM education. My brothers and sisters in math and science are lovely people, and they're smart and they're talented, and they are exactly where they need to be in front of a group of high school students or students, teaching them about the wonders of math and science. However, those two subjects do not lend itself to conversation. And in emphasizing STEM, one of the things that we're emphasizing is the lack of a need for a student to express themselves academically. And so I'll sit there and I'll have these conversations in my history class, and I'm fighting against a couple of things. First of all, especially at the beginning of the year, there are students who are not used to speaking. But of those, there's a bunch of them that just have not had the chance to speak, and they don't have any problem speaking their mind, which goes to the second problem. The second problem is to be able to, if I'm talking about things from kind of like an opinion point of view, the second thing that I'm fighting against is that I'm not really hearing the kid, but I'm hearing the kid's friends, or I'm hearing the kid's parents, or whatever the case may be. This is when I start doing the devil's advocate thing. And this can be problematic because if a student is voicing what they think is widely held opinions, they do not understand somebody who has an alternate opinion. And I'm not expressing my own opinion because I may or may not agree with them secretly, but I think it's good for you to have to develop an answer. It's not enough to just have an opinion, you know what they say about opinions, and so that's the third part. The third part is to be able to explain what you know and explain what you feel, and do so in a logical, reasonable, rational sort of way. Don't dip into the waters of emotionalism. Don't dip into the waters of hyperbole, but rather be able to express your ideas. And all of this is done, and this is what I say the very first day, all of this is done with the attitude that, well, twofold. One, people of goodwill should be allowed to disagree. I don't go for this crap where if you disagree with somebody, somehow you are everything under the book and you're castigated in the worst possible terms. The second thing is, and this goes to what I think is part of the responsibility of humanities teachers, which is to teach civil discourse, is the idea that you talk about ideas, you don't talk about people. And so all this is a part or a component of the conversation in the classroom. But it has to be had. I don't care if people are uncomfortable or not, in that sense, my class is not a safe space, I wouldn't have liked it. Yeah.
I would have been rather uncomfortable because I'd always be worrying what's going to set you off to turn your attention right back to me. Oh no. So I'd look down, or it's like English students you mentioned, in English class. Let's face it, a lot of students don't read the book. If you're talking about a novel, they're just hoping to get through it, but a good teacher can tell if they didn't have some general answer about a passage or
something that comes from the Cliff Notes, or
That's right. Well, you asked about being an administrator. There's something when you observe classes, often the teachers who are less comfortable tend to do more talking during that time because they're afraid in a way of the unexpected, which is anything from a student, because students can get you off track. And then you're having to listen to them to be kind, but then also to redirect. That's not what you want when there's an administrator in there. You want to be on track. So most teachers take the bull by the horns and do all the talking during that time. And once they're out, everybody has a deep breath and they go back to class. But there's a way to look at classes where you're actually counting minutes of who's doing the talking. It's the ratio of the teacher to students as a group. And ideally there's a balance in there. And I think what you're getting at is that balance. It has to do with the quality of that balance, but still, if the teacher's dominating all the talking in the classroom, that's problematic as well. And I think that happens in a lot of schools. They're listening to not just lectures, but process, and it's just a lot of teacher talk.
Right. Well, I mean, and there's another issue is that when you have administrators going into a classroom, you no longer are observing a classroom, you're observing a performance to some degree, because the teacher is a bit on edge, maybe. The students are uncertain, and in everything that they do when the principals are in the room are sometimes an exaggerated form of what they're like. So if they are prone to answer questions, they might be overly willing to, whatever the case may be. And that's tough for the teacher. It's tough for the students, and really it's tough for the administrators, because there's really no other way unless you had some sort of one-way viewing glass to kind of look at a classroom.
I was thinking about the same thing, surreptitiously, just have the big board and say, I'm going to watch this teacher right now.
Yeah.
I think if you told everybody in advance that that's part of it, they'd learn to forget about it pretty quickly.
Yeah. Well, sometimes I've used humor, when principals come in, not necessarily in an observatory capacity, but just kind of doing walk arounds. You got guests in the building and they want to see, we want to see teaching in action. Okay, well, let's go around, And so, I remember the last time it happened, I had a group of adults come in, and the kids because when I'm teaching, I'm actually facing away from the front door. So I can't see if someone's coming up to the door or not. The kids can, because the kids are facing the front door.
Right.
And you can feel a disturbance in the force as soon as the people walk in. And I kind of took a side look and noticed that there were adults in the room. They hadn't said anything, so I assumed they didn't need anything. So I just kept on going. But the students were visibly different, And so at that point, you kind of make it a little bit of a joke. I remember telling them, I said, it's a little bit like being at the zoo, isn't it? And that idea of trying to undermine the tension that exists there. So hopefully the kids will start acting normal. But, part of what, even outside of people coming in, by the way, I think I stole that zoo joke from you, I think. But I think even without people coming into the classroom, I think there's a bit of a performance art with students talking in class. And so the reason why I do the kind of devil's advocate is just to get them to get away from that a little bit and see if I can get an idea of what they really think, or how deep does their processes go. And in the beginning, it doesn't go that far.
Well, you get a real different dynamic, particularly in college courses, undergraduates, where if there's a participation grade, I know a lot of high schools don't have that, but they'll filibuster, the students, and even if they ask a question, there's a preamble to it, and then the professor will say, "Was there a question in there somewhere?" But a lot of students do think that it'll help their grade to some extent, and so they'll talk more than they should. But I do say it is admirable to draw out students who aren't inclined to speak and to do it. And I mean, that's a part of being an expert teacher, I would say, to build their confidence with a easy question, and then maybe take that easy question and follow up. And they've already gotten into the fray.
Intellectually speaking, as far as a person's ability to take in knowledge
Mm-hmm.
and to be able to understand it, to internalize it, what is your understanding as to the kind of the qualities that public discussion within a classroom helps towards that? Because it's always been it's always been my idea that if you can have a conversation, you have the knowledge, provided it's a good conversation. Um, for you, and because you do a lot on the academic pinhead side of things of education, but I'm wondering to what degree have you kind of come across, research, that sort of thing that speaks to the benefits of students talking in class.
But classical schools do this really well,
Right.
Particularly as you get to the rhetoric stage, where they're having discussions as part of the intentionally. The idea would be to engage in the content, and a lot of it is just to show that you understand, that you did the reading, that you're with the teacher, so you can move on, but also to extend this topic a little bit further, maybe outside of what they read.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think for memory, there's a process where the student gets a little bit of context from the teacher, and then they do their own reading, and they come back, and there's a lot of checks for understanding, which many teachers, that's a big part of the class. Mm-hmm. A little bit of lecturing in there, and then working with the material. So I think it's a natural way to do it. And a good teacher is doing all of that at once. So you're asking questions, and then you're also extending and have the skill to bring it back to the topic, because you have to make a lot of decisions. This is really interesting, but we can't spend too much time. So this internal clock the teacher has. But I think that I don't like to get into learning styles. I think we talked about
Sure.
that. But there is something about coming at the material from different ways.
Yes.
So we need to meet the student, and they like visual, so we're going to, but give them lots of ways. But ultimately, to engage with the material, I think that's the most fun, and it's and most likely to capture their attention, because it moves them in some ways beyond the test to the subject itself.
It's almost a shame. Well, it is a shame to some degree that you never taught history, that you never taught a course like that, because your approach is so subtle and so quiet that I think the kids find themselves having learned a whole bunch of stuff, and they didn't even know they knew it, just because you have that way about you have a way with people that way. For me, I always feel like I'm trying way harder than I need to, but at the same time, I do feel like I have a pretty good sense of, how to ask questions and how to draw people out with questions. But at the same time, to your point, we do not profess an acceptance of the idea of learning styles. However, there is something to be said that any kind of classroom should include, among other things, the kids speaking, the kids talking, ruminating, discussing, arguing. And again, we are certainly at a time where people need to learn how to argue well, and they need to learn how to argue with civility. And so my efforts have multiple purposes to them, not least of which you hope the kid learns something at the end of the day.
I appreciate the compliment. I do wish I hadn't had a chance. I'd probably get all the names and dates wrong. So they would have all this incorrect information in their heads, but they would definitely get an opportunity to talk. So the taking that idea of how do you engage with material? I think it does apply to some extent across disciplines. I can imagine teaching English. I mean, you're discussing ideas and philosophy there, and I've done a little bit of that.
Right.
But I think these ideas do apply, and they should apply to math and science. I mean, science of all things has a built-in extension of the conversation. A lot of science classes are really good at the demonstration and even the experiment and the project. But I maybe the better science teachers also open it up. Which is tricky, because they could take it in a lot of directions. But I think what we're getting at is a teacher who's comfortable in their own skin, who's willing to hear from students. That's a little bit rare. Often there's this tension to not hear from them, to maybe just get the right answer, and there, that makes class easy. So you call on the student, they're going to get a right answer. Right. Got it. That means I'm a great teacher. Move on, and you have your usual suspects, right? Round up the usual suspects, like from Casablanca, if we recall. Was that Casablanca?
It was Casablanca.
Yeah, there you go. You see, you get extra credit for that. But being willing to get a wrong answer and then use that as an opportunity to do something really fascinating.
Well, yeah, and this is part of the thing that as a teacher you have to kind of watch for, and that is not to allow the type A personalities to dominate the conversation. And I've had every class, I've got like 3 or 4 kids that'll raise their hand at a drop of a hat, and I'll have to tell the class, listen, I like so and so very much, but the rest of y'all have got to speak up. I want to hear from other folks too. And at that point, usually there's a handful of kids that cannot handle the pressure that they haven't spoken, and I'm now asking them directly to speak. Yeah. And then you start getting different hands. And I always kind of follow up with the type A ones after class. So listen, this is not about you. I'm trying to make sure that everyone can feel as comfortable and as confident as you do in speaking in front of the class. And so you're already there, and you will always be a part of our conversations every day if you want to be. But I also need to make sure that these other folks, feel comfortable to speak as well and can talk about whatever it is we're discussing. So,
well, sometimes we learn more from bad examples of teaching. And I had one, actually, and it was my first doctoral course. So I had an impression, oh boy, the whole program is going to be like this. I'm not too excited. The professor, it was reading based. So there was a reading, and then she would ask a question, and you see about 10 hands go up. She'd write down the names of the hands, and then we'd have to hear from every one of them on the same question. And they would all go through their spiel. And then she'd ask another question, a bunch of hands go up, so that's taking it a little bit too far. And I never really wanted to participate in those. It's like I don't like to participate in group text.
Right.
I usually delete it. But it's just so uncomfortable and awkward and unnecessary. I think at some point you get diminishing returns, reach saturation, and say, okay, we're going to move on. So I'm sure you don't do that.
I don't. And it's interesting. Well, I can't say that I don't ever, just because I do get group texts, and so I'm just not inclined to text in general. And so, usually in a group text, somewhere about 10 messages in, someone will say, hey, we haven't heard from Ross yet on this matter. So Ross is like, call me, you got a question. So I am inherently annoyed by that mechanism, and certainly we can have a discussion later on some other time about what constitutes communication. I'm not sure group texts do, but whatever. So, but yes, I think that particular teacher is taking the formula way too far. And for me, it's more important to be organic. If you can be organic, and if you can allow the conversation to flow freely, you have a better chance of pulling in somebody who may not be naturally inclined to speak, as long as it's civil, as long as they can see that I am not going to allow anyone to disparage anybody else, particularly. That's why I constantly repeat the mantra, we discuss ideas, not people. I think if it's not organic, then not only does the conversation suffer, but so do the individual comments, and it becomes less and less interesting.
It becomes really dull. But as a teacher, you get to respond to these. And I think in the class I was referencing, there was no response. It was just here, next person. Yeah. And so not even engaging, which is tough. But from the students in say a high school class, you want to hear from people in a natural way. Let me ask you a question about methodology. Has there ever been a time when you have stepped to the side and allowed students to moderate a discussion?
Yes. And every teacher can tell you about a time where the chemistry of a particular group of kiddos was just so that they had the capacity to hold the conversation themselves. A lot of classes don't. That's what you hope for. That's what you're driving towards, but it's not always the case. But yes, if the kids are on point, and if the kids are being respectful, the best outcome is for you to be able to step away and not be a part of the discussion. Someone else should be posing some of these questions that I will use to sometimes redirect or to send in another direction or to follow up on an earlier point. And, why the kids can't do that naturally, not without a lot of work or preparation, what have you, that could be another discussion altogether. What is it in our society where our students are not really capable of doing that? But yes, in a perfect world, and it does happen, on a regular basis. It hasn't happened with my kids this year yet, but
darn
but
it,
they're capable. But
there's still time.
There's still time. Yes. But the ideal is for me to be able to step away and allow the learning to take place in this particular case without me.
Well, and a word picture would be the seating in a classroom. Is it set up where you're facing them and they're facing you? Or is it a circle where you're one of many in there? And I just wonder if just the structure could potentially lend itself, unless it's like 30 or 40 kids, and you have a problem. I've always said, as a teacher, I want to be able to get to my students. I mean, I want to be able to walk over them, hand them something, or get their attention. And so it has to be natural seating. But I guess the idea is that if you eventually are not speaking at all, it's a win, and you just can celebrate during that time.
Yes, I mean, some cases your classes are so big, the classroom geography does not lend itself to a seating arrangement that encourages conversation. My class is typically in a U shape, and so they are facing one another. That's partly to encourage the conversation, because you're looking at people, you're talking to people, and and I do that for a reason. So yeah, classroom geography, how the desks are set up, can certainly either encourage or inhibit conversation.
And you also are in the front, and you write things on the chalkboard. Do you still use chalk?
No,
I can pick. You have a dry erase board. I could imagine Herr Miller being the one teacher who insists on a chalkboard with chalk and pencil sharpeners in the room, and no technology. And so they wheel in the little chalkboard in front of the smart board, whatever they're using.
I definitely don't need that. I definitely don't have the need for a smart board, but I kind of do like the whiteboards. I don't need chalk. I mean, chalk was a beating. You're walking out of school at the end of the day, and you got this embedded chalk dust in your fingertips. I mean, it's a constant. I don't need to go back to chalk to continue my bona fides as an old school teacher. I'll just hang on to the lack of technology in my physical grade book, and we'll let that be sufficient for the definition.
Well, I miss the sounds of it, because just the sound of writing, you're actually striking the board with that, and you have a little bit more emphasis in the squeaky sound of that dry eraser, and eventually those things wear out, and that's where it gets uncomfortable, because you're writing, and when they're fresh, it's great, but then when you're getting into that gray color of the black, and then you can't see anything.
But see, I don't often write things on the board.
Well,
because,
Well, are you putting forward the oral tradition? I mean, why wouldn't you emphasize it with writing?
Well, it depends upon what kind of conversation we're having. If the conversation is flowing, I don't feel the need to break up the conversation by writing something on the board. I'd rather the conversation continue to flow. I think as soon as I go to write something on the board, everything stops momentarily. And that can cause its own problems as well, because then you've given the students a couple of seconds to think, well, maybe I don't want to talk anymore, or maybe I want to talk about something else or something. So there is this kind of, it's almost like a lessening of the pressure of the conversation when you stop and go to the board. Even if you weren't talking, kids are looking, I wonder what he's doing, I wonder what he's writing. And then everyone kind of slows down and stops talking, even if they were conversing before. So, and so I try not to, if I do write anything on the board, it's usually at the beginning of a conversation or it's at the end of the conversation, something that just doesn't mess with the kind of organic qualities of the conversation.
I like that term. I think students want to feel like they're not in school.
Right.
So they're just having a talk, and they're not focusing so much on everything that's going to be tested. It's like attending a church sermon. Many I've heard of kids say, "Oh, this feels like I'm in school. I don't like it." Because they're used to being talked to, I guess. So I think you're being a little bit modest. You've become really adept at running classroom discussions.
Well, I still screw up regularly, so it's a learning process. It's a going concern, as the Brits say. So
yeah, so you have been embarrassed.
Yeah, either something I said, or a lot of times what keeps teachers from engaging the students is they're worried that the students are going to say something stupid.
Yeah, and
I never juxtapose those feelings onto myself. I was like, that's not me, that's them, that's their legacy. They want to say something stupid in class, and usually the kids are bright enough, they'll sit there and they'll lambaste a kid for saying something stupid. I don't have to say anything, but I don't care. I don't care if the kid says something dumb. It'll become a learning opportunity for that kid. So,
well, I guess one last thing, because you also have an administrative role. What about your teachers? Do they, particularly younger teachers over the years, are they able to manage that task?
It's not easy, and so I can encourage, I can maybe show a way, I can have them, maybe pop in and say, hey, we're going to be doing this. Why don't you come take a look at it? At the same time, though, my role as a department chair is not the exalted position that some people seem to think it is, nor do I necessarily need it to be. I'm not looking to have authority, but one of the things that, and I will admit, I have a harder time with these conversations as far as as well as I can do from time to time in the classroom. When you're talking to other adults and you're trying to have a conversation that in essence is saying, the way that you're doing things could be made better. So there's sometimes you deal with a natural defensiveness. Sometimes you deal with kind of a blasé attitude. Seldom is the moments where you deal with just, people just bubbling over with the anticipation of learning from somebody else. And so those conversations are harder to have. And I don't have authority. I can't make them do something. I can suggest, I can maybe elucidate, the reasons why a particular method works or doesn't work. But ultimately, what they end up doing in the classroom is going to be their choice. And that's both a plus for the profession, but it's also a huge downside for the profession, because Lord knows there's people doing dumb things in a classroom. So, yeah.
Well, this is an interesting topic. I enjoyed it, but it made me think ahead to next week, because we've actually had another guest, which would be our third guest.
Holy cow. Getting guests out the wazoo.
Yeah. This is Dr. Matthew Post, and he's a PhD, Associate Dean and Assistant Professor of Humanities at the University of Dallas in the Braniff Graduate School of Liberal Arts. And that's a mouthful.
We're bringing in the big guns.
Yeah, so he's agreed to talk with us and probably set us straight a little bit. Maybe he's listened to a few of these and said, don't trust what they're saying. Crap. They are, particularly the one on the left side of the screen. That's you, right?
It's not on my left. I'm on the right.
Well, so I guess I can say it now. Make sure you're on your best behavior.
Yes, dear.
But that's a little tease for next time. We hope people tune in, and we'll learn something. I think we'll probably learn a lot more than he will. I'm convinced of that.
He's just like any other man, only more so, right?
My gosh.
It's another Casablanca reference.
It is.
For the uninitiated out there. But
yeah,
we've had a pretty good string of some great guests. I'm really looking forward to this as it continues on, and I'm very excited about next week. So
let's do it. Well, enjoy your weekend, and watch some more movies. I recommend The Maltese Falcon. I'm sure you've seen that as well.
Yes. Doesn't roll off the tongue the way Casablanca does, but still a great film.
Yeah, and the other Bogart that I watch annually is Treasure of the Sierra Madre.
Yes.
That never gets old. And we could spend a whole episode deconstructing that one.
Now was he a part of? He wasn't part of Bad Day at Black Rock, was he? That was
No one's
that was
seen
Spencer
that.
Tracy.
I don't even know
No
about
one's seen that.
You're getting obscure now.
No, sorry.
That's okay, here, Miller. Why don't I say Auf Wiedersehen, and we'll leave it at that, sir.
Auf Wiedersehen, Herr Dr. Bourgeois.
Auf Wiedersehen, Herr Miller.